My family disowned me because I decided to marry the daughter of a local factory worker. They said, "You are no longer one of us. You chose to marry a low life." I told them, "It's better to be with a low life and have my peace than be with you." What happened next was a big shocker. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Charles Taylor from Arizona. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I never thought love would be the thing that tore my life apart. Growing up, I had everything: money, status, a name that opened doors before I even knocked. My parents, Margaret and Henry Grayson, owned half the town's real estate and a chunk of its pride. They raised me to believe I was untouchable, that our family's legacy was a shield no one could pierce. But then I met Clara, and everything I'd been taught started to crack. It was a Tuesday when I told them. I'd been rehearsing the words for weeks, pacing my bedroom like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. Clara and I had been together for a year by then, stealing moments between her shifts at the diner and my so-called duties managing the family properties. She wasn't like anyone I'd ever met: sharp-witted, kind, with eyes that saw through the bullshit I'd been fed my whole life. Her father, Tom, worked at the factory on the edge of town, a quiet man with rough hands and a paycheck that barely covered rent. To my parents, that made her trash. To me, it made her real. I stood in the dining room that night, the long oak table stretching between us like a battlefield. My mother sat at one end, her lips pressed into a thin line, and my father at the other, swirling a glass of bourbon like he was about to negotiate a deal. The chandelier above us buzzed faintly, the only sound until I opened my mouth. "I'm going to marry Clara," I said. No preamble, no softening the blow. I learned from them that directness was power. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's fork clattered against her plate, and my father set his glass down with a deliberate thud. For a moment, I thought they hadn't heard me. Then my mother laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through the room. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "That girl from the diner? The factory worker's daughter?" "Yes," I said, holding my ground. "I love her." My father leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Love? This isn't about love, Elliot. This is about who we are. You're a Grayson. We don't mix with people like that." "People like what?" I shot back. "Honest people. Hard-working people. Don't be naive," my mother snapped. "She's beneath us. Her father's a nobody, and she's a gold digger who's latched on to you. You think she loves you? She loves your name, your money." "That's not true," I said, my fist clenching at my sides. "She doesn't care about any of that. She's never asked me for a dime." "Then she's smarter than I thought," my father said, his tone cold. "She's playing the long game, and you're too blind to see it." I wanted to scream, to flip the damn table and watch their perfect world shatter. But I kept my voice steady. "I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you what's happening." That's when the ultimatum came. My father stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "If you marry that girl, you're done. No inheritance, no job, no place in this family. You'll be out on the street with nothing but her and her filthy roots." "Henry," my mother started, but he waved her off. "No, Margaret. He needs to hear this. You walk out that door with her, and you're no longer a Grayson. You'll be a nobody, just like them." I looked at them, my mother's icy stare, my father's clenched jaw, and realized they'd never known me at all. They thought money was my backbone, that I'd bend under the weight of their threat. But Clara had shown me something they couldn't understand. Peace. With her, I didn't have to perform, didn't have to live up to a name that felt more like a leash every day. "Then I guess I'm a nobody," I said. "Because I choose her." My father's face twisted, a mix of rage and something I couldn't place: disappointment. "Maybe. You're throwing your life away," he said. "For a low life." "Better a low life with her than a high life with you," I replied. The words felt like a blade, cutting both ways. I turned to leave, but my mother's voice stopped me. "Elliot, if you walk out, don't come back. We'll make sure you regret this." I didn't look back. I grabbed my jacket from the hall, stepped into the night, and drove straight to Clara's place. She was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed, her brow furrowed like she knew something was wrong. When I told her what happened, she didn't cry or panic. She just took my hand and said, "We'll figure it out together." That should have been the end of it, but my parents weren't done. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an old friend who worked at one of their properties. "They're blacklisting you. No one in town will hire you. They're serious, man." I showed it to Clara, expecting her to waver, but she just squeezed my hand tighter. "Then we leave," she said. "There's nothing here for us anymore." By the end of the week, we'd packed what little we could fit in my beat-up sedan and headed for the next city over. I didn't know what we'd find there. Jobs were scarce, and my savings wouldn't last long, but I knew I'd made the right choice. My parents thought they'd broken me, that I'd crawl back begging for their forgiveness. They didn't realize they'd set me free. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. They'd always ruled through fear, through control. But they underestimated me, and they sure as hell underestimated Clara. That night in the dining room wasn't just the end of my old life. It was the start of something bigger, something they'd never see coming. I didn't know it then, but the real twist was still years away, waiting in a will I'd never expected, from a man they dismissed as nothing. Leaving town felt like shedding a skin I'd outgrown, but the new city didn't exactly roll out a welcome mat. Clara and I landed in a place called Riverton, a sprawling mess of concrete and noise, where no one cared about the Grayson name, or the lack of it. We rented a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, the kind of place where the walls creaked and the pipes groaned like they were complaining about our arrival. My savings bought us a month, maybe two, if we stretched every dollar. After that, it was sink or swim. Finding work was the first punch to the gut. Back home, I'd walked into jobs because of who I was. Here, I was just another guy with a resume that didn't match the desperation in my eyes. I applied everywhere, warehouses, gas stations, even a car wash, but the rejections piled up faster than I could count. Clara, though, she didn't hesitate. She took a job waitressing at a diner called the Rusty Spoon, pulling double shifts while I sat in that apartment, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a failure. "You don't have to do this alone," I told her one night, watching her count tips on the sagging couch. Her fingers moved quick, stacking coins into little towers. "We're not alone," she said, not looking up. "We're together. That's the deal." I hated how calm she was, how she made it sound simple when it wasn't. But she was right. We were a team. So I swallowed my pride and took the first gig that stuck, a night shift stocking shelves at a grocery store. The pay was garbage, and the hours left me hollow-eyed, but it kept the lights on. Clara would slip notes into my lunch bag. Dumb stuff like, "You're tougher than you think." And somehow, that made it bearable. We built a rhythm, jagged as it was. Days blurred into weeks, then months. I'd come home at dawn, she'd leave for the diner, and we'd steal an hour together when our schedules overlapped. It wasn't glamorous. Most nights we ate canned soup or whatever was on sale, but it was ours. Clara's laugh kept me sane, and her stubborn hope rubbed off on me. We started talking about the future, not just surviving it. Maybe a house one day, a kid. Small dreams, but they felt huge when you had nothing else. Her dad, Tom, checked in sometimes. He'd call from back home, his voice gravelly over the crackly line. "You two holding up?" he'd ask, and I'd say yeah, even when it was a lie. He never said much, just listened, but I could tell he worried. Clara would take the phone after me, her face softening as she caught him up on our life. I didn't know him well then, just a guy in a flannel shirt who'd nodded at me once when I picked Clara up from their house. But he was steady, a quiet anchor we didn't realize we needed. Then came the call that broke everything open. It was a Thursday, 3 years into our Riverton life. I'd just gotten off a shift, my hands still aching from lifting crates, when Clara's phone rang. She answered, and within seconds, her face went pale. "What? When?" she said, her voice trembling. I dropped the bag of groceries I'd been unpacking and crossed the room. She hung up, eyes wide, and whispered, "Dad's gone. Heart attack. Last night." The next day, we drove back to our old town. I hadn't been there since we left, and pulling into that familiar grid of streets felt like stepping into a ghost story. Clara didn't cry, not yet, but her silence was heavy. The funeral was small, just us, a few of Tom's factory buddies, and a preacher who kept it short. They buried him in a plain plot, no fuss, exactly how he'd have wanted it. I held Clara's hand as the dirt hit the coffin, wondering how a man who'd lived so simply could leave such a hole. Afterward, We went to his house, a squat little place with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Clara wanted to sort through his things, but I could tell she was stalling, avoiding the goodbye. That's when the lawyer showed up. He was a wiry guy named Perkins, clutching a briefcase like it was glued to his hand. "Miss Clara," he said, tipping his head. "I need a word." We sat at Tom's kitchen table, the same one where Clara and I had eaten burned pancakes the first time she'd brought me over. Perkins opened his briefcase and slid a stack of papers toward her. "Your father left a will," he said. "And it's substantial." "Substantial?" I echoed, frowning. "He worked at the factory. What's substantial about that?" Perkins didn't flinch. "Mr. Grayson, Tom wasn't just a worker. 20 years ago, he patented a valve design for industrial machines. Kept it quiet, licensed it out, and let the royalties pile up. He never spent a cent of it, lived off his wages instead. It's all here." He tapped the papers. "Bank accounts, investments, a property upstate. It's yours, Clara. About $4 million worth." I stared at him, then at Clara, waiting for the punchline. "4 million? From Tom? The guy who'd worn the same boots for a decade?" Clara's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I grabbed the papers, scanning the numbers, the legal jargon. It was real. Every word. "How?" she finally managed. "Why didn't he tell me?" "He didn't want it to change you," Perkins said. "Told me once he'd rather see you build your own life than lean on his. But he always planned to pass it on." I sank back in the chair, my mind racing. We'd been scraping by, counting quarters, while this sat in the shadows. My parents' voices echoed in my head. Low life, they'd called her him, and here was proof they'd been blind. Clara gripped my hand under the table, her breath shaky. "What do we do now?" she asked, looking at me like I had answers. I didn't, not yet. But I knew one thing. Everything was about to change. Again. The day we signed the papers, I felt like I'd stepped into someone else's life. $4 million didn't hit me all at once. It was too big, too unreal. Clara and I sat in that lawyer's office, Perkins droning on about transfers and tax forms, and all I could think was how Tom had played us all. Not in a cruel way, but like a chess master who'd checkmated the world without anyone noticing. We walked out with a bank account that could have bought my parents' empire twice over, and I still didn't know whether to laugh or curse. Riverton looked different after that. The apartment above the laundromat, with its chipped paint and rattling windows, didn't fit anymore. Clara quit the diner the next morning. No grand speech, just a quiet, "I'm done" to her boss. I walked out of the grocery store mid-shift, left my apron on the counter, and didn't look back. We weren't cruel about it. We just didn't belong there anymore. The money wasn't a magic wand, but it was a ladder out of the hole we'd been clawing at for years. We moved fast. Within a month, we bought a house on the edge of the city, a 2-story place with a porch and a yard big enough for dreams we hadn't dared voice before. Clara picked it because it reminded her of her dad's simplicity, just scaled up. I liked it because it was ours, not a hand-me-down from my family's legacy. We paid cash, no mortgage, no strings. The realtor's jaw dropped when the check cleared, and I couldn't blame her. I'd have bet against us too, 3 years back. Money changes things, but it doesn't rewrite who you are. Clara didn't turn into some high society queen overnight, and I didn't start strutting around like I owned the world. We were still us, scarred, scrappy, and a little dazed by the turn. But we had room to breathe now, and that's when the ideas started flowing. Clara wanted to build something, not just sit on the cash. "Dad didn't save this for us to waste it," she said one night, sprawled across our new couch with a notebook in her lap. "He'd want us to make it mean something." That's how Haven started. We named it after the piece we'd found in each other, a small company making affordable parts for factories like the one Tom had worked at. Clara had the vision. Use her dad's valve design, tweak it, and sell it to places that couldn't afford the big-name brands. I handled the numbers, the deals. We hired a couple engineers, rented a warehouse, and got to work. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. 6 months in, we landed our first contract, a mid-sized plant 2 cities over. By the end of the year, Haven was turning a profit. Not millions, but enough to prove we weren't just playing rich. Life settled into a new groove. We weren't scraping by anymore, but we didn't flaunt it either. Clara traded her diner uniform for jeans and a clipboard, running the warehouse like she'd been born to it. I ditched the night shifts for meetings, shaking hands with people who'd never heard of Grayson and didn't care. We even started talking about a family, nothing set, just whispers over coffee about a kid who'd grow up knowing hard work, not handouts. Then the past came knocking. It was a Saturday, almost 2 years after Tom's death. I was in the garage, tinkering with an old bike I'd bought to fix up, when Clara called me inside. "You've got a letter," she said, holding it out like it might bite. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's, sharp, precise, unmistakable. I hadn't heard from my parents since the night I'd walked out, and I'd made peace with that. Or so I thought. I tore it open, expecting venom. Instead, it was a plea. "Elliot," it read, "we need to talk. The business is struggling. Your father's health isn't what it was. We made mistakes, but we're still family. Come home." No apology, just that old Grayson entitlement, like I owed them something after they'd burned me out of their lives. Clara watched me read it, her arms crossed. "What do they want?" she asked. "Help," I said, tossing the letter on the table. "They're sinking, and they think I'll bail them out." She didn't say anything for a minute, just studied me. "Are you going to?" I laughed, short and bitter. "Why should I? They blacklisted me, called you trash, called your dad worse. They don't get to rewrite that because they're broke. They're still your parents," she said, not pushing, just laying it out. "Yeah, and they chose that title over me." I paced the kitchen, the old anger flaring up. "They thought I'd fail without them. Look at us now." Clara nodded, slow and steady. "So we keep building. Let them figure it out." That should have been the end of it, but the letter stuck with me. Not because I felt guilty, I didn't, but because it proved they'd been wrong. I'd built something better without them, with Clara, with Tom's ghost in our corner. Haven wasn't just a business. It was a middle finger to every low life they'd spat at us. And it was growing. A week later, I got a call from an old friend, Jake, who still ran in my parents' circles. "Hey man," he said, voice low like he was spilling a secret. "Your folks are in deep. Creditors are circling. They're selling off properties left and right. Word is, they're asking around about you, how you're doing, where the money's coming from." "Let them ask," I said. "They won't like the answer." I hung up, a grin tugging at my mouth. They'd push me out, thinking I'd crawl back. Now they were the ones scrambling, and I was standing taller than ever. But I didn't have time to gloat. Haven had a new contract on the table, and Clara was already sketching plans for expansion. The past could claw at us all it wanted. We were too busy running toward the future. Success has a way of making the past feel like a stranger. By the time Haven hit its 3rd year, Clara and I weren't just surviving, we were winning. The company had grown beyond that first warehouse, with contracts stretching across state lines and a crew of 20 who looked at us like we knew what we were doing. We traded the sedan for a truck, the kind that could haul equipment, or a stroller when the time came. Clara was pregnant now, 5 months along, and we'd started turning the spare room into a nursery, painting it blue because she had a hunch it'd be a boy. Life was good, better than I'd ever imagined back when I was a Grayson in name only. Then they showed up. It was a crisp Saturday morning, the kind where the air bit just enough to wake you up. I was in the driveway, unloading lumber for a crib I'd decided to build myself, when a black car rolled up, sleek, polished, a relic of the world I'd left behind. My father stepped out first, his suit hanging looser than I remembered, his face carved with lines that hadn't been there 4 years ago. My mother followed, her heels clicking on the pavement, her eyes scanning our house like she was pricing it in her head. I dropped the planks and wiped my hands on my jeans, waiting for them to make the first move. "Elliot," my father said, his voice thinner than it used to be. "We need to talk." I didn't answer right away. Clara came to the door behind me, one hand on her belly, watching them with a calm I envied. "You're a long way from home," I finally said. "What's this about?" My mother's lips tightened. "Don't play coy. You know why we're here." I crossed my arms. "Actually, I don't. Last I checked, you made it clear I wasn't your son anymore." My father flinched, just a flicker, but it was there. "Things have changed," he said. "The business, it's gone under. Debts piled up, tenants bailed, and the bank took what was left. We've lost everything." "Everything?" I echoed, keeping my tone flat. "That's a shame." "Don't be smug," my mother snapped. "You've done well for yourself, obviously. We hear about your little company, your money. People talk. Yeah, they do, I said. Funny how that works. You didn't care what they said when you blacklisted me. We were wrong. My father cut in, stepping closer. We were angry, prideful. But we're family, Elliot. That still means something. I laughed. A hard, jagged sound that startled them both. Family? You threw me out like garbage. Called Clara a gold digger, her dad a nobody. You don't get to waltz up here and claim blood now that you're broke. Clara moved beside me, her hand brushing my arm. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her steadying me, like always. My mother's eyes flicked to her, then narrowed. You owe us, she said. We raised you, gave you a start. Without that, I'd still be here. I interrupted. Because Clara and I built this. Not you. Tom's money gave us a boost, sure, but we turned it into something real. You had your chance to be part of my life. You chose power over me. My father's shoulders sagged. We're not asking for much. Just enough to get back on our feet. A loan, an investment, something. We're living in a rented flat now, Elliot. Your mother's selling jewelry to pay bills. I let that sink in, picturing them in some cramped box, their empire reduced to pawnshop receipts. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for them. They were my parents, after all. But the bigger part remembered the dining room, the ultimatum, the way they'd sneered at the woman I loved. They'd bet against me and lost. This wasn't my mess to clean up. No, I said, simple and final. You made your choice back then. I made mine. We're even. My mother's face twisted, rage breaking through her composure. You ungrateful little Margaret, my father barked, grabbing her arm. He looked at me, eyes pleading. Elliot, please. I'm sick. The stress, it's killing me. One mistake shouldn't end us. I stared at him, searching for the man who'd ruled my childhood with an iron grip. He was gone, replaced by this frail shadow begging for mercy he'd never shown me. You didn't make one mistake, I said. You made 1,000. Every day you thought money was worth more than people. I'm sorry you're hurting, but I'm not your fix. Clara stepped forward then, her voice quiet but firm. You should go. We've got a life to live here. My mother glared at her, venom in her eyes, but my father just nodded, defeated. They turned back to the car, moving slower than they'd come. I watched them drive off, the black sedan shrinking into the distance, and felt a weight lift I hadn't known I was carrying. Not guilt, not triumph, just closure. Later that night, Clara and I sat on the porch, her head on my shoulder. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, meaning it. They're not my problem anymore. She smiled, small and knowing. They never were. Jake called the next week, filling in the gaps. My parents had sold their last property, a summer house they'd clung to like a lifeline, and were barely scraping by. Word around town was they'd burned too many bridges to climb back. I didn't care enough to dig deeper. Haven was landing a deal with a factory chain, and the crib was half built. My world was here, not there. But I couldn't shake one thought. They'd come to me because they'd heard about our success. That meant they knew Tom's low-life legacy had outdone them. It wasn't revenge, not really, just proof that the life I'd chosen was stronger than the one they'd tried to force on me. And it wasn't over yet. The day our son was born, I knew the fight was over, not just with my parents, but with the version of myself I'd left behind. Clara went into labor on a Tuesday, 2 weeks early, and by midnight, I was holding Thomas, named for her dad, in a hospital room that felt too small for the size of the moment. He had her eyes, sharp and steady, and a cry that could have woken half of Riverton. I looked at him, then at Clara, exhausted but grinning, and realized this was what winning felt like. Not money, not revenge, just this. We'd come a long way from that apartment above the laundromat. Haven was a name people knew now, not just in Riverton, but across the region. The company had grown to 3 warehouses, pumping out parts that kept factories humming, and we'd carved out a niche no one else bothered with, affordable, reliable, built by people who'd been on the other side of the line. Clara ran the show, even with a newborn on her hip, sketching designs between feedings. I handled the expansion, shaking hands with plant managers who didn't care where I'd come from, only what I could deliver. We weren't billionaires, but we didn't need to be. Tom's fortune had given us a start. We'd taken it the rest of the way. My parents faded into the background after that day in the driveway. Jake sent updates now and then, unasked for, but I didn't stop him. They'd moved into a smaller place, a one-bedroom outside town, and my father's health kept slipping. My mother took a job at a boutique, selling trinkets to tourists, a far cry from the queen she'd been. I didn't feel sorry for them, but I didn't hate them either. They built their cage. I'd escaped mine. That was enough. A year after Thomas was born, we got a chance to prove it. Haven landed its biggest contract yet, a deal with a factory chain that'd take us national. The signing happened in a boardroom 2 hours from home, all glass walls and firm handshakes. The execs asked how we'd started, and I told them the truth, a factory worker's daughter and a guy who'd walked away from everything. They liked that, called it grit. I didn't argue. When the ink dried, Clara squeezed my hand under the table, her wedding ring catching the light. We drove home that night, Thomas babbling in the back seat, and I felt the pieces lock into place. But the real closure came later, on a quiet afternoon when Thomas was 2. I was in the yard, pushing him on a swing we'd built, when the mail arrived. Clara brought it out, a single envelope in her hand, no return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly, my father's, shaky now, not the bold scrawl I'd known. I opened it while Thomas giggled behind me, the creak of the swing cutting through the silence. Elliot, it read, I won't ask forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Your mother's gone. Hart gave out last month. I'm not far behind. We were wrong about you, about her, about everything. I see that now, too late. You built something I never could. Keep it. That's all. No signature, just those words, jagged and final. I folded the paper and handed it to Clara. She read it, her face still, then set it on the picnic table. You okay? She asked, same as always. Yeah, I said, and this time it was deeper than before. It's done. She didn't push, just nodded and went back to Thomas, scooping him up as he squealed. I stood there, watching them, the letter sitting like a ghost. I didn't need to fight anymore. My father's words didn't change what they'd done, but they closed the book. They'd lost everything, money, pride, each other, and I'd gained more than they'd ever understand. That was the end of it. Years later, when Thomas was 5, we took him to Tom's grave. It was a simple stone, same as the day we'd buried him, but Clara had added a plaque. Thomas H. Reed, father, innovator, part of Haven. We stood there, the 3 of us, and I told Thomas about the man who'd made us possible, not just with money, but with the kind of quiet strength I hoped he'd inherit. He didn't need to shout, I said. He just did what mattered. Thomas squinted up at me, all curiosity. Like you and Mommy? I grinned. Yeah, kid. Like us. Clara took my hand, her fingers threading through mine, and we walked back to the truck. Haven was thriving, Thomas was growing, and we had plans, a second kid, maybe, or a new branch for the company. The details didn't matter as much as the feeling. We'd built a life that stood on its own, not on anyone else's ruins. Looking back, I could have let my parents fall to find me. I could have gloated, rubbed their faces in it, but that wasn't the point. The point was Clara, laughing as she chased Thomas through the yard. The point was Haven, keeping jobs alive for people like her dad. The point was me, standing taller without their shadow. They'd called her a low life, thought I'd failed choosing her. But Tom's secret had flipped the game, and we'd played it better than they ever could. My family wasn't the one I'd been born into, it was the one I'd made, the one that mattered. And as Thomas ran to me, arms wide, I knew we'd keep building, not for them, but for us. That was the legacy worth leaving. If you loved how they turned rejection into triumph, hit that like button and drop a comment. Tell me, well, what would you have done in Elliot's shoes? Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story like this. Up next, we've got more tales of grit and glory. See you in the next one.